they do. Just go ask them. So what's he do? 7 months.
Well, it's close.
But we didn't.
We're Pocono this weekend. Just for you.
Oh, you are going to that, huh?
Up to the Rangers.
You all set? We need a little time to get organized. Well, I don't quite know how to introduce Art Hart to you because he's a champion in so many fields. But I've known a few people who have been many talented people who could do most anything that they look at and set their minds to, and Art certainly qualifies in that department. He's done some wonderful things. Unfortunately, a lot of them are related to the antique car hobby and to Stanley's in particular. So that appeals to me a great deal. I guess I've known Art, 20 years? A little more than that, a little more. He thinks he was here once just about 20 years ago, so it took him all too long to get back. But we're glad to have him tonight. I might say a little more about what he does for the hobby. For one thing, Art has a Model 70, which is a 1910 Stanley. The car behind Bill Schwobel here is a 71. They're basically the same, except the 70 has a wider back seat, and it's a 5-passenger car, and this is a 4-passenger car. They're both pretty scarce models. The only thing is, Art's is perfect. We don't know yet whether this one's perfect. It looks all right, but it hasn't been run yet. Now, he runs his all the time on all the tours. He's been up Pikes Peak and back with it, and a lot of lesser things, and it'll look just like that car looks right now. So when we're in New Hampshire, those of you who go next summer, I want a couple of you to spy on Art. And I want you to be out there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, because it must be at that time that he cleans his car. You never see him cleaning it, yet it always looks like that. And he drives it everywhere. That's one of the things he does. He also runs a parts business for us, and he puts out a catalog. He has several of them here tonight. I think some of you have seen it. Makes all kinds of nice things, like pressure tanks and little brass lamps, dash lamps, and he doesn't make them from scratch, but he rebuilds them, and many, many other things, valve handles, fittings, the original type Stanley fittings, and you name it. Art sells whistles, sells hexane, sells packing, sells all kinds of stuff that we all need. So I think rather than try to tell you everything about Art, which I couldn't possibly do, I'll let him take over from now, and I'm sure he has a very interesting presentation here, and we will allow some time so you can ask questions and then talk to him a little bit after he's finished. So my pleasure, Art, to welcome you to Delaware, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Tom. I don't think I can live up to that, but that introduction, especially the thing about the car, I think if you look carefully, you'll find it's pretty dirty. It's been on the road for, I guess this will be the 17th season. And it looks more like the H5 than the 71. Really, if you look close, paint's starting to crack and come off. But half of the battle is keeping it clean, and it always looks better than it really is if you keep it pretty clean. Well, tonight I didn't quite know what to do, but I thought I'd start out by telling a few stories, some interesting incidents, or crazy incidents that don't happen to gas cars that seem to happen to Stanleys. And then talk a little bit about my one technical subject on fuel and vaporization and the fuel system on a Stanley, which is one of my pet subjects to rag on about. And then I talk a little bit about vintage steam products, my business, and how I got into it, and some of the things I make, and challenge of making some of these things that nobody else wants to make, and figuring out how they made them originally. But my car is, as Tom said, is a 1910 Stanley Model 70. It's a picture that was on a calendar last year. It looks pretty much like that car, except the back seat's wider. But when I was getting ready to do this, it reminded me of a book I've read called Smogless Days. It was written by Stanley Ellis, and the subtitle was Adventures in 10 Stanley Steamers. I think by the time he died, he'd actually had 11 or 12. But when he wrote the book during the 70s, I guess, or late 60s, when people were worried about smog, they thought steam cars were going to had such complete combustion they would be smogless and they were the wave of the future. So he wrote this book, and it's very good reading if you haven't read it. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about adventures in one Stanley steamer, because I've only had one. And unlike Tom, I think one's enough. Sometimes, as you'll see when I tell these stories, one is too many. In fact, the way I got into steam was through a friend of mine in Canada, Gordon Smith, who had a 1900 Mobile steamer, a little locomobile type thing with tiller steer. And we went to Canada for a lot of tours with the Historical Automobile Society of Canada, where our kids were little, and we had a gas car. And in '76, we were guests of his family, because the tour that we went on was run by he and his son. And this was in Orillia, Ontario. So we stayed at his house instead of at the hotel where everybody else stayed, which is only a few hundred yards away. And that year he was having a lot of trouble with the little locomobile, or a little mobile. So my 1909 Oakland 40, which is a big gas car I had at the time, was parked right next to his in his garage. He actually had garage space for me. Canadians are very hospitable, I found. Anyway, at night, I ended up helping him because he was nearly 80 at the time, and he was having trouble getting around. And I was young and agile, and so I climbed under this thing and started tinkering with it, and I kind of fell in love with it. And that must have been, that was in '76. And by '78, I had one myself, and a little locomobile. And it lasted about 9 years. I mean 9 months, and I had to have a Stanley. And so by fall of '78, I had my Stanley, and I had to sell everything else, all my other cars to get it. So I didn't get it. Anyway, first story I'd like to tell has to do with a circle tour of New England. It was run by Skip Carpenter, a gentleman from Massachusetts who still runs an awful lot of tours. And this tour can best be described as a Friends of Skip Carpenter tour, because at the time he was driving a Stanley, and he invited 6 steam car owners and 6 gas car owners. So there were 12 couples. It was to last 2 weeks. It was basically 2 or 3 days of driving, and then a day of rest when you could do your laundry, catch up with repairs or whatever, and or maybe see some sights in the area that you were staying. The problem with all this was that you're relying on a Stanley for basic transportation. It wasn't like being on a hub tour where you could come back every night, regroup, you had your tow vehicle, all your tools, anything you could bring with you there to work with. You had to bring everything with you. And initially, my wife and I thought, you know, this is great. We're going to stay at all these historic inns. It's going to be very romantic. And she reminded me, we never went on a honeymoon. Maybe this would be a honeymoon, you know? Even though we had 2 grown daughters who were in college at the time. Well, one was in high school, one was in college. And we thought, you know, they wouldn't want to go because it's 2 weeks, you know. They won't want 2 weeks taken out of their summer at their age. Well, that wasn't to be the case. They decided they'd love to go. So it became a family outing instead of a honeymoon. But the basic thing was still that we were using the Stanley as transportation. And there's an old steam car guy from Maine named Maynard Layton, who's been gone quite a few years now. Maynard always said, Stanleys are a wonderful hobby, but lousy transportation. You know, I've gone on 2 of these circle tours, and I think he's right. It seems like most of my adventures happen on these circle tours when you've got to depend on the car to keep going. And sure enough, the first night of the tour, we went from Skip's house in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, to Tamworth, New Hampshire. And actually, it was the second night. Second night we were at Tamworth, New Hampshire. And as we pulled in, the boiler was leaking badly. And the car at this point, I'd had 6 years, I had 16,000 miles on it. And I hadn't, never scorched the boiler. And I hadn't scorched it then, it was full of water, but it was leaking. And this is, I think Tom's familiar with this problem. The boiler is basically mud burned. It's got a solidification of solid matter at the bottom of the boiler that insulates the tubes, and they get overheated with the hot fire that we use, and the tubes start leaking. They won't seal anymore. And the only way to keep it from leaking is fire real hard so that the tubes expand a little more. And I used that the latter half of the afternoon, and it was a panic trying to stop and siphon water and keep the fire going, and when there's water trying to drip down on the fire. But anyway, we managed to get to the evening stop, and Brent Campbell and Don Gordon, both of whom I think you folks know, helped me, and we swaged the boiler that night, got it fixed by 1 o'clock in the morning, and we went on the next day. Well, we went another 2 days, it turned out, before we had a problem again. But this problem, this time we laid the blame on a totally different reason. We had gone to Bethel, Maine, and then on to a place called Sudbury. I think we were at the Sudbury Inn for 2 nights. And we had a lot of wash to do, because we had everything packed in the car, and we had to take everything with us. We had to take all the steam cylinder oil, all the pilot fuel for 1,500 miles. And I had 3 grown-up women and myself, all this stuff, in just a Model 70. So, we had that, so I made everybody take just 1 suitcase. My oldest daughter found a suitcase. I don't know where she got it. It was the biggest thing I ever saw. So everybody had a big suitcase. And I made a little pickup box that went in a luggage rack on the back of the car that held up the bulk of this stuff. And I actually made I've got a suitcase that fit inside my spare tire on the side. It wasn't round, it was a square one. I had it bungeed in. We looked like the grapes of wrath. But, so the car was heavily overloaded. And usually I get about 30 miles on a tank of water, about a gallon a mile. I think it's a 32-gallon tank. And usually, after many years of driving the car, I know it pretty well. And after 25 miles, I make a mental note of the odometer reading. After 25 miles, I start looking for water. And I don't panic if the pumps run dry, because I usually run the boiler pretty full of water. And I have enough to go a few more miles even when the pumps quit pumping. But my wife has learned to recognize when the pump stops. She said, "Didn't the pump stop? Shouldn't we be looking for water?" I said, "Yeah, I've been looking for water for the last 5 miles." But I like to siphon water, because I don't know if you do a lot of siphoning, Tom, or any of your people do, but the beauty of siphoning water is I can typically siphon 30 gallons of water in about 3 minutes. And you mix the steam with the water when you do that, so you end up with hot water. So now you're pumping hot water into the boiler, and it doesn't kill your head of steam so much as cold water that you might get at a gas station, which invariably takes a good 15 minutes from a hose, if you've got good pressure. Well, anyway, here I am, we're going along, and we've got to Sudbury, and we've got a day off, and my wife reminds me we've got to do the wash, and I said, well, they planned this trip to Bob Bear's car collection in Oxford, Maine, and I think we ought to go. She says, but it's raining. I said, well, it's only a drizzle. So we all decided to go, and we'd do the wash when we got back. So we took off in the drizzling rain, and we got to see Bob's collection. It was fantastic, and the house he lived in was unbelievable. It was built for Hannibal Hamlin, who was vice president under Abraham Lincoln years ago. It's a beautiful mansion, wonderful setting. All it was drizzling all the time. So we headed back, and we decided we'd get a head start, because most of the days we've been running, we've been behind everybody else. And of course the gas car guys were giving us great guff about not keeping up. And usually I'd go whizzing by them and stop for water, and they'd go by me, and then I'd go by them. And I said, you know, I got to go fast like this because I've got to stop for water. And in the end, I'm going the same speed because the average speed with water stops is the same. And when we pulled into the Sudbury Inn, we'd come in the last car because we'd stopped at a number of antique shops. And so I pulled up in front of the porch of this inn. This is when we got there the first night. And it was a beautiful day. And everybody was out on the porch. And I knew they were there, but I didn't look at them. I pulled up, I pulled the emergency brake on, I locked the throttle, and I looked up, and there's all the gas car guys sitting there drinking their cocktails, and they all have paint masks on. They're complaining the Stanleys stink. And most of us, it was Brent Campbell and Don Gordon, Skip Carpenter and I don't know who else. Oh, Jim Weidenhammer was there with his Blake steam. I don't know who all else. There were 6 of us. But we're all running a mixture of diesel fuel and gasoline for fuel. And when the fire shuts off, it usually dribbles, and we run pretty rich mixtures, and that stuff would kind of float out the back, and it does stink. Especially Brent's car. Brent's is really rich. So anyway, those guys were giving us a hard time. So here we were, we're coming back from Bob Bear's, and I said, we're going to beat these guys home. So we're the first ones out. And we're going along pretty well, and all of a sudden, there's just a wall of water came down. It was one of those torrential downpours. And for the first time in my life, I had trouble keeping the fire going. There's so much water coming in the Venturi tubes. The pilot went out instantly. There's no way in hell I was going to get out. The water comes down like that. And when it's raining that hard, the best thing to do is to keep moving. If you stop, more water comes in than if you're going. So I was going probably 25 or 30 miles an hour, trying to keep the fire on so it wouldn't get drenched, drowned out by the water. When I realized that the pumps had quit, and I looked down, and sure enough, I looked out, and sure enough, we don't have any water in the tank anymore. And here it is, it's pouring rain. And we're coming into this little town of Bryant Pond. Now this was in 1988, and about 3 years before, Bryant Pond had been featured in a Bell System ad for being the last Bell System office that was still on crank phones. You had to crank and ring the operator. So we were quite familiar with Bryant Pond because I'm from Maine originally, and we read this and thought it was, this is terrific. It's too bad they had to do away with the crank phones. So we're coming into this town, and the water level's going down in the boiler because I'm just pussyfooting along. I'm looking for a hose. I can't water any place. I went by a place and it was too far off, a stream that was too far off the road. I couldn't reach it with my hose. And I'm looking to the left and right, and in every yard, looking for somebody who has a hose hanging out or a water faucet on the outside, anything, because I'm getting desperate. The water level is only about an inch of water left in the glass in the boiler. And here we are coming in. The sun is starting to come out, and the water is just running down the side of the street, but it's not deep enough to put a hose in. But, I mean, there's water everywhere, and I don't have any water. So I pull into the, I guess was the center of town. There's a general store, and there's 2 gas pumps out there, and across the street is a bookstore, a used bookstore. And I said, well, I got to pull in here. So my wife says, well, I'm going to the bookstore. So she goes to the bookstore, and the kids go in the grocery store to get a candy bar, some soda or something. And I pull up and I ask the guy in the store, I said, you got any water? I tell him my problem. And he says, no. I said, well, I need a hose. Anybody got a hose around here? Is there anybody you know has a hose around here? Is there another gas station? No, there's not another gas station. This is it. And I said, well, what am I going to do? And I didn't dare move the Stanley because when you bring it to a stop, the water level of the glass goes down even lower, and I couldn't see it. But, the bottom of the glass is still 3 or 4 inches off the bottom of the boiler, so I knew I had some water in there. So I decided I'd go across the street to the bookstore, confer with my wife. And as I come in there, I hear the proprietor of the bookstore on the phone hollering into his phone, which is not a crank phone. We got a Stanley steamer here, and it's out of water. If it doesn't get any water real soon, it's going to blow. And I thought, oh my God, what has my wife told this guy? And she's explaining to me while he's talking on the phone that she told him what the problem was, but she didn't tell him it was going to blow. Anyway, he gets off the phone, and I said, well, actually, there's no danger here. I just need water. I can't move it very far. I'm going to have problems. And he says, well, he says, you know, that's the fire department. He says, they're just over there. They're playing cards, and they haven't had any excitement for 2 weeks when we had the last brush fire. So besides, they got a brand new water truck they haven't tried out yet. And this will give them a chance to bring their water truck out. So he says, you go across the street, they'll be right along. So by the time I get across the street, in rolls this 1948 oil truck. It's painted with a brush, fire engine red. This is the new water truck. So these guys, and behind him is a bevy of pickup trucks. They all pile in to clog the whole parking lot for this little general store. And they whip out this hose, and you know, it's a 4-inch hose. And if you know, as you know, the opening on the water tank isn't much bigger than that. It's about that size. So anyway, they give me the hose. They say, you put it where you want it, and we'll turn it on. I grabbed this thing, and I got it. I'm holding it over the opening. You can't get it in the opening. I'm holding it over the opening. They crank open the thing, and it just throws me out of the car. The water goes all over the place. Floods the inside of the windshield, all over the upholstery. You know, and then they shut it down, and finally they get it going at a reasonable rate. I can hang on it when I'm putting it in there. And some guy's talking to me, and I look back a few minutes later, and what's coming out of this hose is red. And I look at it, and it's a slurry. I mean, it isn't even water. It's more like rust with water mixed in with it. It's not rusty water. It's rust. So I whip the thing away as fast as I can. Of course, it goes all over the dashboard. Now we got this rusty water. It's all over the place again. And these guys are crestfallen. You know, I mean, here they brought out their new truck for me. I don't like their water. But I explained to them why the water had to be clean and all this. And finally, one of the volunteer firemen says, well, my house is just about 100 yards down here, and I got a hose to my garden. He says, if you can get it over there, I can fill you up. And I said, yeah, it'll make it that far. So I back up, and kids pile in. My wife comes in, is over here by then, and we pile in, and we get 100 yards down the road. We're going away. They're all clapping and hollering. Oh, this is great, you know. So we go around the corner to the this guy's place. It's still right on the main road, and all the while the gas car guy's going by. You know? Everybody goes by. And I stop and I get this guy's hose, and he turns it on, and I put it in, and you know, the water's just kind of coming out. You know, it's not the force is terrible. You know. And I says, is this it? He says, yep, that's it. He says, we got a shallow well pump, and it doesn't do too good. But it took me half an hour to fill in water. In retrospect, I probably should have drained the tank and flushed out what was in there, because the next night the boiler was leaking again. And when I got back to the Sudbury, Inn, everything seemed to be okay. But of course, all the gas car guys were there. They got there before me. And anyway, several days later, we swaged the boiler again. I guess it was the next night we swaged the boiler again. And then we headed out, and the next stop was at Don Borden's. And Don Borden makes boilers. And we headed down US, I guess it's Vermont 100. Is it Vermont 100? Yeah. Vermont 100, which is one of the most scenic roads in Vermont. I just love that road. Boy, this day I sure did. We were going along, my daughter was driving, and she was a mechanical engineer and was pretty savvy with these cars, or used to be when she was home, and loved to drive. So she was driving, and we made our first stop for water, and I lifted the bonnet to see how things were going, and there's steam coming out. You know, I hold my glasses over there, and sure enough, it's water. It's leaking again. And we haven't stopped more than about 3 minutes, and the water starts dribbling out of the venturi tubes. And so I make sure the fire's going. We siphon water as fast as we can, and we don't even get a full tank. And I said, I think this will get us to Don. We went up, and Route 100 goes up Killington Mountain, where the Killington ski area is. And then you make a left at the top, and you come down into Woodstock, where Don Borden lived. And I said, we got to keep this car going. So at this point, I'm driving. I'm trying to keep the fire going so it won't go off on the automatic. And we come up to the hill, there's a stop sign there, we're doing fine, there's no traffic, I can keep going, I don't have to stop. Make a left, and we come upon this construction. They're repaving whatever the main drag is that goes down through Woodstock. And it's backed up, and we stop, and I thought, this is it. But no, I guess we've been firing hard enough, it had temporarily sealed up, and it was okay. There was no steam, no water, and pretty soon they let us through. They were letting cars come from the other exit. They let us through, and we kept going. We got all the way to Don's place, and Don knew that, you know, that I was having problems, and we were probably going to have to put a boiler in at his place or do something. So I got there, and I stopped, and it was fine. And the lunch stop was there. So he said, well, lift the hood flap and let the cool air go through there. He says, I bet it won't be 10 minutes. Well, it was more like 5. And the water was just pouring out of the doors. So I said, what are we going to do, Don? He says, well, I got a shell here all done. It's all drilled and welded up. He says, I got no wire on it. But he says, the problem is I don't have any tubes. He says, I'm all out of tube material. I've ordered some before we went on the tour. He says, let me call my supplier. Well, when he got in to his phone, his answering machine had a couple messages on them, and he looked at those first, and one was his supplier saying his tubes had arrived. So he sent his cousin Sean after, no, I guess it's his nephew, Sean, with a pickup truck after the tubes. We had lunch there, and I started pulling my car apart. And that night, after everybody had left, the rest of the tour went on. And we stayed there, and that night we wrapped the boiler with copper and cut all the tubes. The next morning we nailed the ends of the tubes, and he had one of his summer college students that helps there working too. And by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the boiler was done. We put it in. Don helped me plumb some things up. He went to bed about 11 o'clock, and I finished cutting up all the asbestos and everything, sealing it all up, and I was done at 1 o'clock. We got up at 4. We drove the whole tour from that we were supposed to have done that day and caught up with people for breakfast. Wow. This is supposed to be fun. Meanwhile, my wife and daughters had gone on with Sean in the mountain wagon. He had taken Don's mountain wagon, which is what he had on this tour, and gone on, and I don't know what happened. They went over some mountain that was very steep. My wife to this day will not tell me what happened. Neither will Sean nor my daughters. They had some hair-raising experience on the mountain with breaks and coming down. I never heard of it. And that night they stayed at a place which is called the most romantic inn in New England. And I wasn't there. So that was supposed to be the highlight of our honeymoon, the most romantic inn in New England. And I wasn't even there. So she had to share the room with my daughters. But anyway, that was about the extent of that first circle tour. The second circle tour we went on was not quite as eventful. The boiler held together. Actually, that was 4 years later, and I had 12,000 miles on the boiler. The brand new boiler we built at Don's. And I decided I was going to treat the water. I had decided that the water was the problem. I was going to treat it for acidity. I was measuring pH and adjusting it with chemicals all the time. And one of my friends, Jerry Farnsworth, who's a steam car guy, is in the water treatment business. And he says, Art, he says, I don't care what you do to that boiler. He says, you can treat it for anything you want, but you'll never get everything. And when you treat it for one thing, something else will go off. And I said, well, how can that be, Jerry? I mean, if I got the pH right and I've got all this stuff that eats up the oxygen, so consumes the oxygen, so it won't corrode and all this, it should be good. Well, that boiler plugged up solid with this white stuff. It plugged my first thing it plugged was my check valve, and I had to. And when it plugged that, the reason I knew that was plugged is because I blew up my feed water heater. And so I found the plugged check valve, and I bypassed one half of my feed water heater, and that kept me going. But when I came to the final banquet, the boiler was leaking again. And I decided Skip Carpenter's tours are what did in my boiler, so I haven't been on any since. That car. But anyway, the only other incidents that happened on that second tour, which was a circle tour of Maine, not of all of New England, was that one quick little story was my daughter was driving again, and we were going along and we needed water, and this is always a problem, you always need water. And we came over a stream, and I said, she says, how's that, Dad? I said, no, that's too far down. And then I realized the stream went down behind this parking lot for a shopping center. And it looked like on the corner of the shopping center I could get close enough to the water. So I said, oh, it looks like I can get water over there. Pull in here. She said, right here? And I said, yes. Jammed on the brakes. And that was the first year I had hydraulic brakes on the car. And it locked up both rear wheels, and it pulled the valve stem out of one of the wheels. And instantly the car goes boom, down like that, and there's the two lock rings and the tire rolling down the road. 2 lanes right there, widens out right in front of this shopping center, and she was in the left lane and was going to make the turn, you know. And so all this stuff went flying down the right-hand lane, and there's cars going by me, and they all pull over to the side, and all of a sudden this car's going all directions, there's people running after this stuff. The rings, the tires. Anyway, it was quite a scene. And then later on, we're going along, and we get to a place in the road where I think we were somewhere east of Bangor, before you get to New Brunswick province of Canada. We're way in the eastern part of Maine, and there's nothing there. The roads are beautiful. And we're in this beautiful stand of evergreens, and it's it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just as quiet as can be and peaceful. There's no wind. The sun is perfect. Everything's running great. It's one of those few times in a Stanley where you can totally relax. You know, I'm going along, and I just said to Nellie, you know, it doesn't get any better than this. And then, bump, 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 bump. You know, and it was just like a tire went down. What's that? And I'd stop, and I got out, and I looked all around. I expected there to be a flat tire. It sounded just like a flat tire, except it wasn't pulling, so I knew it was in the rear. I get out and I look, and all the tires are okay. And I'm looking around, I said, what the heck is this? And I look under the car, and the front of the siphon hose, which goes back and forth in there, had fallen down like this. And it worn a hole right through it. And that was that quick a period of time. So it was really nothing to worry about, but it taught me that you can't let these things get the best of you. When you think everything's going right, that's when it's most likely not to be.
Now, of all the tours I've ever been on with this guy, he never has a bit of trouble. He runs perfectly. I can't believe these stories.
Well, time's getting on here. Let me, I've got all kinds of stories I could tell you, but I think I've told enough stories. One of the things I wanted to talk about on a technical nature has to do with the fuel system. It's one of my pet things. I talked to Tom and Frank a little bit about this at dinner tonight. And early on I had a locomobile, and it ran on straight gasoline, or was supposed to. And I'd heard gasoline was nothing but trouble. You really ought to run on Coleman fuel or something like that. So I called up the Coleman company, and you know, if you're going to run a whole car on Coleman fuel, you need a lot of it. I wanted to buy it in a 55-gallon drum. So I called up Coleman in Wichita, Kansas, and I got the vice president of outdoor products. And I said, I want to buy Coleman fuel in bulk. How do I go about doing this? And he said, well, the problem is, he says, is we have Coleman fuel made in 5 different locations around the United States. And I could tell you where to get it, but I don't know if they'd sell it to you, because they usually just make some, then it gets packaged up and sent on. And he says it's made by the Northeast Chemical Company in Pennsylvania. So he gave me their address, and I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, he says it can be anything. He says each of the 5 places makes it their own way. I said, well, you must have a spec on it. And he says, yeah, we do. But it's a performance spec. All it has to do is work in our Coleman stoves for, I forget what it was, X number of hours, and still have the same size flame when they started as when the test ends. So it can be anything. So I called it up Northeast Products, or Northeast Refining, or whatever it was. And I said, listen, I'd like to buy a 55-gallon drum of Coleman fuel. So he told me what they did is they make it up and they sell it to tank car lots. And they'll sell it to, well, no, I'll take that back. It was Pennsylvania Oil Refining Company, I think it was. And they sold to Northeast Chemical in tank car lots. And Northeast Chemical gets orders from places like Kmart or some big distributor that distributes the little cans that you see. And they'll package the whole tank car load for Kmart. There's none left. So the salesman said, well, what are you going to do with this stuff? And so I told him. And I said, well, listen, one of the things that Carl Ainsley's using is rubber cement solvent. Is that something I could get? And he says, yeah, but he says rubber cement solvent, he says it's basically 50% heptane and 50% hexane. And he said there can be other things in it too. And he says, well, I said, well, what's the, I said, that works good. He said, what do you mean by it works good? I said, well, it doesn't make much carbon. So I told him how it was a vaporizing system like a Coleman stove, and that, you know, if you get carbon in there, it plugs up the nozzles and the fire goes down. You can't go as fast. So he said that, well, he said, why don't I send you a mixture of 50% hexane and 50% heptane and try it out? So he did that. He sent me a gallon of it. So I drained my pilot tank and I put it in there. Well, a gallon isn't very much, and it's not much of a test. I tried it and it worked fine. So then I was talking to one of the chemists at work, and he said, well, you know, I think they use hexane. Why don't you use straight hexane? He says, that's in our stock room here. I said, well, not that I could get it out. I mean, it came in little bottles. And he said, you know, he says, it seems to me that the ASTM, the American Standard Testing Materials people, have a test where they use hexane because it's so pure. So, and I'd also found from talking to the salesman that he said, yeah, hexane has 2% aromatic hydrocarbons in it, just because of the way they crack it. It comes out quite pure, and that's why they use it in ASTM tests. But the heptane was something like 3% or something, 4% aromatics. And it's the aromatic hydrocarbons which make the carbon when you in your vaporizing system. So the guy at work told me the thing about ASTM, and I said, okay, let's try that. So I tried the heptane and hexane, and it worked pretty good. So that's how I started using hexane as a pilot fuel. And you know, a lot of people told me, well, Coleman fuel works pretty good. Well, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I found the Coleman fuel I was buying, I could run on a tour from like 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 at night without any problems, only if I stopped and cleaned the pilot out at lunchtime, made sure all the carbon was out of it, and especially on the needle. And maybe every week or so I'd take the whole thing apart and clean out all the cross-drilled places and make sure there was no carbon in anything. And then it would run fine. But with the hexane, I tried an experiment a couple of years ago. I put it in March at the beginning of the season, and I ran almost 2 years without ever taking the pilot apart. So that's how clean the stuff burned. But the problem with the main fire is that you want to use something that you can buy on the road if you're going to do a lot of touring. And a lot of the early cars were running on gasoline up through 1912. Then when gasoline became more expensive than kerosene, with the popularity of the gas cars, Stanley's wisely switched to kerosene for the main fire and gasoline for the pilot light. And they claimed, I guess, the cars would run on straight kerosene or a mixture of gasoline and kerosene equally well. Well, the advantage they gained, the cars were also getting heavier by this time. And the advantage they gained was that kerosene was a heavier fuel. The heavier fuels have more BTU, so you get a hotter fire, which is nice. But the problem is that kerosene is so heavy, it's very difficult to vaporize. So they went from a gasoline vaporizer, which basically went straight across the burner. In the case of this Model 71, it would have been 23 inches long. They went to one that was over 7 feet long. Someone said on the condensing cars they were 11 feet long. I don't know. They're very long anyway, so they could vaporize the kerosene. But we found over, a lot of people had found, not me, but previous owners had found that if you run like a 60% mixture of diesel fuel and 40% gasoline, that you get the advantages of both. It's fairly easy to vaporize. You got quite a bit of heavier fuel, so you got a real hot flame. But the problem is you still get carbon flakes, you know, in jets, and it builds up on the vaporizer. And the problem is that on gasoline, there's all kinds of additives. A lot of them in the past have been aromatic hydrocarbons. Now the EPA is trying to get aromatic hydrocarbons out of gasoline. And every year, I think the gasoline's a little different. It's probably a little better for our use. And I tell people if they're putting gasoline in, they probably should buy the cheapest grade they can. It's got the fewest additives and probably will make less carbon. That doesn't necessarily follow anymore, but it sounded good at the time. Anyway, and of course the diesel fuel and kerosene, nobody controls, up until recently, nobody controlled the aromatic hydrocarbons in it. And I found out that standard kerosene and diesel fuel can have well over 25% aromatics in it. I'm asking at these different refineries. But 2 years ago, the EPA or whoever it is that regulates fuels, motor fuels, decided that they were going to limit the amount of hydrocarbons in diesel fuel. So they did that. And in the East Coast, it's 25%. And of course, California wanting to be better than anybody else, they're limiting it to 10%. So that diesel fuel is probably pretty good to use for fuel. But there are pure kerosenes, though. Pennsylvania Oil Refining Company has what they call a number 2251 oil they use for a base for insecticides. They also use it for washing insecticides off plants, fruits and vegetables, and things like that. And that stuff has essentially no aromatics in it. But I forgot what it was, over $10 a gallon. You'd have to get 55-gallon drums. And of course, it doesn't make any sense as a main fuel because you've got to be able to get it along the road. But I see time's getting on here. I've got a lot of strong feelings about how to run a Stanley on the diesel fuel and gasoline mixture. And since I'm running out of time, I once printed something up which I call Stanley Vaporizers, back in fiction. It's got a little bit about running a vaporization system in various kinds of steam cars. And I've got copies of this, which I'll leave here. And I've also got stories of copy of my Bryant Pond story, which appeared in the Horses Carriage Gazette some time ago. You can have that. But what I'd like to do now is tell you a little bit about running a small steam car parts business. This is my catalog, which none of you have seen. This is the latest edition. And it has some new things and some old things deleted that weren't selling well. But one of the challenges of doing all this, well, how I got into this was that, you know, when you go to restore a car, you find you need things. So you call people who got similar cars and you ask them, you know, where can I get one of these things? And invariably they'll say, I don't know. I don't have one either. When you find one, let me know. Or you find so, you know, you find 6 guys that don't have this thing that want it, and you borrow one from somebody that does have it, and you make a casting or whatever, and you machine the thing up, and now you can sell the others and recoup your investment. And especially if you've got to have patterns made and things. But that's kind of how I got into it. And actually, I was making parts for other cars at the time, one-cylinder Cadillacs, when I got my Stanley. And so I sold that business off as the Stanley parts started building up. But one of the challenges is trying to make something that nobody's ever made before, or in some cases have tried and failed, or have tried and made something that nobody would buy. And one of those things that I'm kind of proud of is these little wire valve handles. This is an original, which is just sandblasted and painted black. This is one of the ones I made. These were originally nickel-plated steel. This is electropolished stainless steel. The electropolishing gives the look of plating, and basically all it is a reverse plating thing where they take away material on a very fine level, and it makes it look shiny. Now, Harrah's Automobile Collection years ago had tried to make these, but they would only make them and sell them in groups of 200. And they made the little wire part here too thick. They made it thick enough so when they made them, they didn't even look right. And they sold a few to some people, and they weren't too happy with it. And I went to a number of stamping places, and I said, listen, I want to make these things. Will you guys make them for me? Oh, no, we can't do that. I said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, the problem is this part here that's curved around. You know, we don't know how to do that. That's what's called, the only way you can do it is to push it, to have these fingers up like this, like that, and you got to push it into something that's curved, and it'll follow around. And that's kind of a lost art. Nobody does that anymore. And I got told by 3 different places locally, but you can't do that. It won't work. It's uncontrollable. So anyway, I decided I'd do it. So I bought, I'm going to bring that line. Anyway, I had a bunch of these stamped out commercially because there's a lot of area around here. They were solid. And I had a die made to stamp out these little arrows. See? So this was all done on a kick press. This isn't a real punch press or anything. Every time I want the thing to come down, I got to push it with my foot. And there's a lot of area in this. This takes 2 feet pushing hard. And I did 1,000 of these, and I hurt my legs. I tell you, I was lame all winter. But anyway, you have to do one of these, index it around, do another one, and you come up with this. Then the next thing you do is you bend these things up. So I made a die to do that. And of course, the first die I made was soft steel. I'd never done this before. And I played around. I got it to work. And each time you do it, it scrapes it all up. See, it's, you know, after a couple times, the piece is useless that you are making this with. So finally, I got it all figured out, and I made a piece and got it hardened, and that worked. Got to that point. And then the next thing to do was to do this thing where you have a cup where it's curved around, and these things come around and hit. And it pushes these out so that they get the right shape. And it worked. Couldn't believe it. It worked. They told me it didn't work, but it worked. So I did that, and then I pushed up the middle, and I punched a square hole at the top, which is all pretty much standard stuff. And it worked. So we've had these for quite a few years. I've sold 2,000 of them, and I just made another 2,000 a couple of years ago. And then Alan Blazek out on the West Coast says, I want some of these. Well, the problem is, do you have these on any of your cars?
Yeah,
there's not very many. The Tillesteer cars used them, and I think they use them up through the early Model Fs. There's a little drain cock, tri-cock kind of thing, and they use these things. They got an 832 hole screw holding them on, and they were nickel plated too. Problem is, there's hardly any of them. How can we make these cheap? Well, my big expense was this die to do this outside thing and have an outside shop do that. So we had to get around that. So Alan gave me another one of these. It was beat to hell, and I flattened it out, and I made a drawing of the thing, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So I sent these out to California to a place, and they were laser cut. We only wanted to make 100 of them. So those are laser cut, and they're beautiful. And so I went through the whole rigmarole with the little dies, made a little set of dies, and there we are. Huh. But, I mean, it was more an exercise of something to do in the winter because, you know, I don't know, I might have got 10 cents an hour for making my dies and making these things. But I don't have a lot of money in them because the laser cutting of 100 of these was, I don't know, $1.50 a piece or something. And then I got them electric polished and done lots to it. But one of the other little things that I find is, this is very satisfying. The thing that isn't satisfying is that the steam car community knows when you're running out of something. And for instance, I make quite a few fittings. If any of you have seen my catalogs, I got more and more fittings in here than I've had before. There's 5 T's, an elbow, and straight fitting, and the nut that goes on for the flares. And initially, a lot of these were made by somebody else. A fellow named Derek DeToy who got killed in a tragic car accident in his Rolls Royce. But he had made these, and he had like $6,000 invested in this, and I was selling them for him. Well, he died, and then I started running out of these things, so I had to get more. And what happened was, the first thing that happened is I ran out of elbows. Well, elbows are pretty common. There's quite a few of them on the car, and the T's there aren't so many. And what happened was, one guy, Pat Farrell actually, bought quite a few. And I would normally sell maybe 2 dozen of them a year, maybe not even that much, at least a dozen a year. That was it. Well, he wanted 75. Well, I had 73 left. So I sold them to him. I hadn't sold any in about 3 months. And the week after he sold them, I must have 15 guys call me up that wanted over. And it's like somebody broadcasts to the world that Art's out of elbows. Go buy 'em. That's the best thing you can do for business is say you're running out of something. Boy, it works. Anyway, I've rambled on too long, so I'll open the floor to questions if anybody has any questions. Yes?
What are your 60-40 mix with length vaporizer?
Oh boy, that's all in here. You want me to go on for a couple minutes? The whole thing with vaporizers, the fuel system, is trying to balance the ratio of the fuel to the length of the vaporizer, to the pressure you're using to push the fuel, to the nozzle size, and to the way your burner is set up, the size of the holes in the burner. Well, I learned from Brent Campbell, if you want to make a Stanley go with a standard Stanley burner, the first thing you do is you drill the number 55 drill holes, all those 4,000 some odd holes in there, out with a number 53 drill, which is 7,500 thousandths bigger. And if you go any bigger than that, if you go up to like a 1/16 of an inch, you could have trouble with it lighting back. Because if the holes get too big, then you don't generate any pressure underneath, and that all has to do with the size of the venturis and things. So you got to have pressure underneath. So you do that. He says use a 6-foot vaporizer, use a Schedule 40 1/4-inch pipe for the vaporizer, and use a 3/16 stainless steel cable on it running full length. Run 160 pounds pressure and use number 58 drill size nozzles, and it'll run great on 60/40. Well, I've set 2 cars up that way. The other one belonged to George Shepard at the time. I had drilled his burner out. His car was set up exactly like mine. Mine ran great on 60/40. That car up there smoked like you wouldn't believe on 60/40. I had to go to 55/45 on that, and it ran fine. And it must have something to do with how high the vaporizer is up off the flame, or something about the heat of the burner is different. That car was, obviously the vaporizer wasn't hot enough, and it was coming out really wet. Well, with the fuel, the whole key is to get the material out of those nozzles as wet as you can and still run it if you don't want it to carbon. Because what happens is, if you have it coming out really dry, well, gasoline will come out dry anyway, but if you've got a lot of kerosene or diesel fuel in it, it won't come out too dry. There'll always be a mist or a haze there. But if you had a long enough vaporizer so you didn't get a mist, you're probably cracking the fuel. And when you crack or pyrolyze the fuel, you're going to make aromatic hydrocarbons, even if you don't have any. If you had none, you'd make some. If you had already had some, you're just going to add to it. And it seems that the wetter you can run the fuel, the less problem you're going to have with the nozzles. And so what I do is with my car and this other car that I worked on, I use a 6-foot vaporizer and full-length cable, and then I play with a mixture. Now I found, after I rebuilt my burner, I made a new pan. I made everything new in it because it had a lot of miles on it. It was getting pretty bad. Put it all back together. It was making I was getting a lot of carbon at 60/40. So I went to 65/35, and that's what I'm running now. It was infinitely better. Plus the car had a little more power. You could feel that 5% difference if you really know your car.
But now you're cutting when you pull up to a station to get fuel, now you're doing some real mental gymnastics to figure out.
No, I'm not. What I did is pretty clever. The tank in the back of my car is sloped on 2 sides, everything. Anyway, I calculate all. I have a stick I stick in there, and for every inch, it's marked every inch, and it's got a line down the middle. On the one side it says diesel, the other side says, and it tells you how much of each to put in where it wets it to fill it within an inch of the top. That's the only way to do it. I've been with Brent Campbell when he always puts a diesel in first, and he always gets too much. You know, he looks in and he guesses at it. He's never right. And you know, you go along behind him, you never want to follow him. There's this haze of stuff coming around. I think he runs a 6-foot vaporizer at 75% diesel fuel and 25% low right now, and it's ghastly. I mean, mine's bad enough, but this is horrible.
Well, I would certainly agree with what Art says on having to keep it almost too wet if you want to do away with buildup, because in the later years of Stanley, they had too much vaporizer. I don't know if it was 11 feet.
I don't know.
They had something like 9 feet anyway.
They had a lot.
They had a lot because of people would try to light the burner too fast and they'd get the car on fire, and they thought if they had more vaporizer it would light easier, and but they got into carbon problems all the time. And when we went to West Coast and back on that first tour with 8,300 miles, it really is slow. You know, when you start out, you got to be real careful and use that firing up valve and take it real easy until you get it hot enough. But that fuel was on the wet side for the whole trip, and we didn't have any
We run
trouble.
straight kerosene.
Pretty much, yeah.
I've never run straight kerosene. Carl Ainsley used to run those Baker burners straight kerosene. It looked like a fire hose squirting and stuff. It's just raw as could be. It burned. But he was firing up.
He probably had great big nozzles too.
Oh, yeah. 50, 56. And I'd see him there at Hershey, you know, getting the car ready to go, and the fuel is squirting in there when he's using straight kerosene. He's got a torch on the outside trying to heat the outside of the nut with an open flame, and it still doesn't light it so well.
Well, Art said he wanted to talk some about fuel tonight, and he's had a lot of experience with it, and he can come at it from the technical angle a little bit, which I can't, because he understands those things, and I find it very interesting.
Well, I'm not a chemical engineer by a long shot, but I work with a lot of them. I'm a kind of a renegade mechanical engineer amongst a bunch of chem engineers and chemists. And those are the guys that are talking to me about. So ask those guys at the refinery about aromatic hydrocarbons. All right. Not knowing what they were or anything. Aromatic hydrocarbons are generally, I don't know if you're into chemistry, is a ring structure. Benzene, carbon jet, some of those things are aromatics. I know for a while there's a lot of benzene in gasoline as a combustion improver. And that's the kind of stuff they're trying to get out.
Can you tell in your car by the smell whether the burner is right or not?
No, I can't smell.
You don't get any smell.
No, I can smell.
You
Sure
got
I do.
you got a perfect mixture.
No, not by a long shot.
Well, Frank Hicks, I think, burns kerosene mostly. And the time you were out there on the tour in 1990, and I was standing on the street in Leadville, and Frank pulls up with his big touring car, and I could smell it. And I said to him
That's
a
pretty
little
hot.
bit later, I said, I know it's steaming well. It just had that right smell. I can't describe the smell exactly, but it's a dampish smell. It's not a smoky smell at all. But don't often get it. But when you get it,
That's right.
you're doing right.
Yeah.
Doing as well as you can do.
Well, the other thing I think that's a problem is it's well known that copper makes fuel go sour, as they call it. I mean, it goes bad. There's some reaction between a lot of the additives they put in fuels and copper. And here we're running with copper fuel tanks, copper pressure tanks now, and if you're using mine, and copper lines. And I know for a fact, after running for 16 years, that the fuel that I leave in the tank all winter is going to give me all kinds of problems in the spring. And I usually try to run it out. This year I ended up with 3/4 of the tank. And I ran it 2 weekends ago to go to a steam car club, local steam car club meeting we had, and about every 15 miles, I was jumping out and cleaning the thing. And I found that when I go on a tour, the car always runs much better on Friday than it did on Monday, and it improves all day, all week long. And I think it's just getting that, you keep the fuel moving, and it doesn't sit there very long. And once you get all that old fuel out of there, it seems to work out.
If you ever decide to make another tank,
I'm going to make it out of stainless steel.
well, don't make it out of galvanized, because there's something about the zinc and the
Zinc, I'll make it
galvanized the
believe it.
diesel fuel a little.
Yeah, zinc is one of those materials that's very high in the electromotive, chemical
They always
element
tell you-
scale. It's very reactive. You have
They
to
tell you
believe that.
diesel storage to stay away from galvanized
Really?
fittings and everything,
Yeah, copper is bad. I know, I built that tank myself, brand new in 1979, and you look in there and it's black as pitch. There's all kinds of things hanging off, growing off, and it looks awful. I think I'd make it out of stainless next time. Have stainless lines and stainless pressure tubes. Yeah.
Just don't use stainless fittings in the boiler.
Why?
Well, the difference in expansion, they
Really?
tend to leak at the thread.
Really? I haven't had any problem. I got all stainless fittings. Of course, every how many years I pull a boiler, replace it.
How many boilers have you had in it?
I'm on my third one. That second one, I don't count. The first one lasted almost 18,000 miles. And I read in a Stanley Bulletin once, had to do with condensing cars. It said if you take really good care of your boiler, it should last 20,000 miles. That's frightening, the cost of boilers.
It wasn't so much in those days.
No, it wasn't. But the one that I treated the water on, I only got 12,000 miles on it. I mean, you could flip them over, but when Don makes a boiler, I think the bottom tube sheet is 3/8. And the top one, I think, is only a quarter. You could flip them over. I said, the hell with that. If I'm going to go to all the trouble taking it out, I'll pay the $3,000 and I'll put in a new one. And I gave the others to Carl. I mean, he came all the way up from St. Thomas, Pennsylvania to my place, which is not a short haul, just to pick up these free boilers.
Yeah.
3 free boilers. One was somebody else's. But he came up and picked up 3 free boilers, which I'm sure he flipped over and went in somebody's cars.
That weekend.
You blow them down every time you get done with them?
Yeah, oh yeah. And in fact, one of the guys I talked to, the guy who we talked to about treating the boiler, with Jerry Farnsworth, the guy I mentioned before that told me that I shouldn't treat the water, that told me the best thing to do is just blow it down. And the guy that sold me the boiler treatment compound said, every time you get water, you should just blow each one of them a little bit. It's a good time. Every time you get water, it's every 30 miles or so. Just let each one blow off for 15 seconds and it cleans the crap out of the bottom. But Carl once cut one open. He said, he says, you see from where the blow-off is, it only cleans a little area. And we put 4 on them now, usually on a 23 or 6 on a big one sometimes. And they're probably only just cleaning a little bit of the boiler out. And they're only getting the stuff that the water's going to knock out. Anything that's really on there is not going to come out.
Herb cut a boiler apart here a year ago or so, and tell him what you found there, Herb.
There were, on the sidewall, there wasn't very much stuff on the bottom.
Really?
But on the side walls, and this boiler had actually rusted through in the side walls. It had some pitting that eventually went through. Up near the top band. There was a funny crustation in between where the tubes came close to the side wall. There was clean stripes, relatively clean stripes in the wall. But the area between the tubes had like blisters of a black, very thin deposit. There was an airspace behind it. And once it was dry, just the slightest disturbance would cause this stuff to crack. I mean, it was very, very brittle, very thin, but there was like these, it almost looked like very small, half of a grape, here, there, and randomly positioned. And when you clean these things off, or when you broke one of them away, some of the bigger ones would have a pit starting to form at the location where this blister or stuff was. In fact, the stuff was so fragile that by the time I brought the piece down to Tom to show it to him, most of it had, just from carrying it around and bumping it against things, had broken off. I think you still have a piece of that.
But you could just see ridges parallel to the tubes on that shell.
Yeah, and the shell was very, very thin. I was surprised at how thin it was for, everybody's making boilers now. They want to make the shell, some reasonable thickness. And this thing was like 130, 140 thousandths thick where it wasn't rusted. Or where it wasn't pitted.
We had 3 boilers go bad in the shell within a couple years here. And I just said no more retubing of old shells. It's not going to be worth it.
Well, Don won't retube a boiler. Well, he'll only tube a boiler if you take the old tubes out. He takes its false economy. He always has it.
But
I've never tried to take
You
them
can even take them out and shell. What you can see, it looks reasonably clean. But as Herb says, I bet that shell is so thin in places because the way they made them, drawn them all out
Yeah.
of these. And so they must not have intended it to be much more than 1/8 of an inch thick.
And it was a uniform thickness too. You would think in the process of drawing it would be a little heavier down at the bottom, just naturally, they'd have to stretch the metal at the top further to get it up there, but it was pretty uniform, top to bottom in thickness. But I know that I saved a segment of the boiler. I saved like a pie-shaped segment just to, for show and tell. And the rest of it, I figured, well, I'll take the copper tubes out just for the copper, to scrap it.
It's not worth it, is it?
It's not worth it. There is no way to get those tubes out. And I wasn't even trying to save the heads. I mean, I didn't care whether I beat things up or not. But there's no way to get those things out of there easy.
Do you have any more questions for Art, either in connection with his touring or in connection with his knowledge of cars?
You ever try using that, any additive like stable to
The fuel? I haven't. I don't know if that... Right.
I know it worked great on my lawnmower, I just wondered.
Yeah.
That's mostly for water.
Well, it's supposed
No, it's
to
supposed to
stabilize,
It's supposed to.
stop it from evaporating.
Well, back when... I worked for Lucent Technologies, back when it was part of AT&T. We used to have a guy that was pretty good on fuels, and they had standby generators at all the central offices. And he said that they've got fuel in some of those that's over 15 years old. But they just keep treating it. I presume it's diesel, I don't know. And they test it.
It's also
treat
heated.
it.
They have a circulating pump that preheats it before it goes into
Really?
the engine.
We didn't ask you ahead of time. We hope you don't mind being taped because that perennial taper over here.
You have to have a hobby.
He has Jim Weidenhammer describing a white
Uh-huh.
tape, and he has all kinds of things.
Does he tell you how to run one of those? I don't know much about those.
No, Art says he's not an expert on whites, but if he ever got interested, it wouldn't take him long to be.
Oh, I don't know.
We have a terrific tape of an expert telling all about them.
Yeah, it is a very good explanation of the way, how to fire it, what all the things do on it.
For one of the mornings in Canada, I spent an hour while he fired it up, while my friend here fired the Stanley up at Leatrope. So it was interesting. It's so much different.
Yeah.
Totally different. 4 wheels in a fire, that's it.
The never out lanterns that you restore, do you restore them that are very badly dented, or do you have a shop that you send them out to do
No,
that, or you do them yourself?
I take dents out if they're not too bad. I like them You know, I like to have a reputation for them being pretty much like new when they go out. So I have a number of pickers that buy them for me, especially at Hershey. I usually end up with 5 or 6, and I've got 3 or 4 guys that are looking for them constantly. And they know what to pay for what condition they're in, pretty much. They've learned over the years. But, you know, I'm always shy of tops. The little tops come on. And to get a good one, I'll pay $35 for a top. So a lot of times they can find a lamp that's just smashed. It's got a top on it, you know. They'll get it. Or a lot of times the top's missing, the bottom's missing, all the glasses are broken, but the body's nice. You know, I mean, that's worth $75 to have a good body. There's certain things I'll pay for. So I end up, I don't know, if you ever come to my shop, I got a shelf about this long, about that deep. It's just lined with these things, and they're all parts lamps. There's things off each one. And like right now, with Hershey as bad as it was, I end up with no lamps this year. And Tom, I've restored 3. One was for Tom's 8.5 over there, fairly recently. And I only had 3 left. I got none right now. If somebody wants one, I've got to go through all my junkers and try to find a body and a door and this and that.
Didn't they make a bicycle lamp that was exactly the same, except the
Well,
lens in the back?
the lamp was so...
The red lens.
What?
The
Yeah,
red
there's one
lens
with a
in the
big red
back.
lens in
It
the
was
back.
a bicycle.
And I can't use much of those, many parts off that.
But it's the same size as the...
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's just in the back there's a bigger hole. There's a bigger hole in the reflector. And it's got this lens on it.
Right. You
Guys
see,
don't want 'em for
you see
standards.
quite a few of them too.
Yeah.
But they're-
What's the difference in a brass one and a nickel one and all that?
I don't think they ever sold them when they weren't nickel.
They were all nickel?
I think they were all nickel. I've never seen one. They also sold them up. They sold them up through World War I, and you see them sometimes with USA on the front of them, painted Army olive drab. I don't know what the hell the Army used them for, but they were a universal lamp. They came in a box with a bracket on them to go on a leather dashboard of a buggy. And there's a picture of it. There's a picture of the corner of a dashboard with a whip, you know, and a whip socket, and this lamp sticking on the side. And people used them for everything. They were used on bicycles, they were used on Stanleys. I think it was a universal lamp. And I got lots of, I once bought 7 of them in the original box.
Did you really?
Boxes, years and years ago, about 25 years ago. And they all had these brackets in them, so I got a pile of brackets that have never been used, but nobody wants nobody wants to put them on the buggy.
Art, does anybody, or do you make electrification for that?
No, mine's electrified, but what I did is I just ran a wire, what did I run a wire? I took the fount out of mine. You know, the bottom comes out, the font comes out. There's no font in it, and I just run a wire in where the adjusting place for the wick is, and I've got a bulb. I just got a bulb soldered on the ends of the wires, just hanging in there. Nobody can see in there anyway, because it's up close to the dash.
Another thing Art used to sell, and I guess you still do, a wonderful little attachment for a gas headlight, acetylene headlight.
I sold that.
You don't have those anymore.
I sold that out with my business when I went into the just standing stuff.
That was a halogen.
There's a halogen bulb on a stand,
yeah,
just
yeah,
like the
right.
Y-shaped acetylene burner.
I have a pair of them that I must put in one of the cars. I've never installed it.
Yeah, if you put them in, and you can actually run the wires. The wires are pretty fine. If you drill the elbow out a little bit, you can run them right down the rubber tube and out under the car somewhere before the wire comes out. And once you look, you look quick and you just see there's something in there. It looks like a burner, but it's just got a little tiny 55-watt halogen bulb.
Ron Gochuk and his brother
They're making them.
make that fixture as part of their business.
Yeah, I sold it to them, yeah. Along with the one selling the Cadillac business. That was one of the things they wanted real bad. It's one of the few things I wish they hadn't sold. They don't market it very well, but it's a gold money. Everybody likes it.
When you tour and all, does your car have dead side indicator on it, or do you
Yeah.
use a 3-2?
No, I don't believe in Ouija boards.
See, he's,
I admire him for trusting that damn thing.
Yeah.
Boy, I'm an engineer. I like to see what's going on. I don't want to feel
Okay,
it.
next question is, where on the boiler is it?
The rule of thumb that I got from Brent Campbell and all those guys was to mount the thing 1 inch down, the top of the housing of the thing, 1 inch down from the top of the boiler. And some of them they talk about 2-bolt, 3-bolt, 4-bolt indicators, you know, how many U-bolts there are.
Right.
And Mike May, who talked to you guys, I think, he uses a little tiny thing. It's only 3 bolts. And he says if it goes down below there, he says, you know, there's still got plenty of water. Mine's too long. Mine's got mine's about this long. The glass part's got about 6 inches of.
So does it get below the floorboard then, or?
Yeah, I've got a notch in my floorboard, and I reinforced my firewall with a big hook of steel to compensate for that.
you have a light under there
I
so
have a
you
light
can see
under
it.
there. Yeah. I don't usually need it. I mean, unless it's dark out. But even on a cloudy day with the top up, I'm so used to looking at it. It's over towards my side. The passenger rarely can see what the level is unless the light's on and they look over like that. But it's to the right of the winker. So it's
Close to the reverse pedal.
yeah. When my pedal goes down, it's probably less than an inch from the slot where that's in there.
Well, aren't those gauges only guaranteed for 350 pounds or something like that?
I think they're guaranteed.
The ones that
Or if the Penberthy ones are guaranteed for steam fairly high. I think it's 450 or something.
yeah, they're the ones where the water's black because that's what you
Yeah.
want to
It's a
see.
reflex
Yeah,
gauge.
yeah.
Well, I could go into a whole dissertation about that too. Because the problem with those is is that the gaskets don't last too long. You got to torque them up every once in a while.
Nobody has had trouble with the glass blowing yet,
Yes.
have they?
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
last year. And I wasn't anywhere near the car. I was
Thank God.
I was with Don Davidson. We were going to a hit-miss engine meet over in Pennsylvania, Bangor, Pennsylvania. And we stopped at a spring to get water. And we siphoned it out of the spring. And I moved my car ahead, and he siphoned his, and I went up in the woods to use the men's room. And and the women were hanging around talking. Nobody was by the car, and all of a sudden, the whole car is engulfed in steam. And that thing just crazed in a million pieces. Nothing came out of it. I mean, it's almost an inch thick, but it just broke in a million pieces in this week.
That's what that one in Canada did, the purpose.
Yeah.
Someone broke one up there.
Yeah, we were at that village,
Yeah.
the little town village.
It's a little-
The guys had one fresh.
It's a little scary because if any glass came out of it, it was in the car. It would be good.
What was that one that Charlie Johnson was putting in that car?
That was a long one.
Yeah, and he said it was something like 4,000 pound though.
Well, that's
No,
what he
that's-
said, but I didn't.
That's not for steam, though. I don't think they're rated fairly high for cold.
Excuse me.
Yeah, for water, oil, or anything like that. The problem is the gaskets don't hold up under that pressure, and eventually the water gets into the gasket and wets it and corrodes it. And they sell a stainless steel one where the wetted area is stainless steel, but instead of getting 200 and something for it, they get 400 and something for it. And so I looked at that, and it's just a rectangular block with a slot in it. And so after that incident, we tried to repair this on the side of the road, because I always carry spare glass. I didn't have the right size wrench with me. And you're supposed to torque it up, and you torque it up to about 30 pounds cold. Well, the car is still hot. There's still a little steam coming out of the bottom connection. And while we're putting it together, it wetted the gasket. When I torqued it, it squished out, because when it's wet, it squishes out. It squished out and it broke through the glass almost instantly. I hardly had it torqued up, you know, and I was just starting to go, and the bottom was obviously going easier because the gasket was soft. Because there was a little bit of steam coming in and it wet. But so now I carry one. So now I bought a brand new gauge, and I carry one all made up with all the fittings on the end of it, so I can put it in when I've got a problem. I carry it with me. But What I did this time, though, is I made all new stainless steel backs myself. I found a piece of rectangular 303 stainless that worked.
Mill of slaughter.
And it made the whole wetted part stainless. But I'm not sure it's going to solve the problem. It'll solve the problem of the thing corroding, maybe. The gasket may still get weak and flow out. I don't know.
You might look for a different material.
Yeah, they have 3 different materials, and I found 2 of them are horrible, and one of them works.
Yeah, we've had a lot of trouble to work with it. The bonnet gas is blowing out from our steam valves on whatever they're shipping. And they've gone to this, it's a tan stuff. It looks more like Corfan with these new shoes.
I get it restored. Good place. Stand up. Yeah, when I had, well, let's see, when did I put that in? It was last year. So I fired it up maybe 3 times, and this spring, I de-winterized it 2 weeks ago. I said, you know what, I checked that thing. And it was practically 0 torque, and I took up probably a turn and a half in every bolt. The thing squishes out, you know. And you can't tighten it up hot, because it'll just extrude the gasket. You gotta tighten it cold. I've never had a glass last more than maybe 3 years. At first I thought it was the gauge. There was a gauge that came with the car. So I bought a brand new one and put that in. And I found, that lasted longer. The other one, I remachined that I don't know how many times. And probably somebody before me remachined. And I think the shorter they are, the longer the glass. Mine's an inch longer than most people's, and I seem to have more trouble than anybody else. I think I got 4 bolts. Most people, maybe I got 5 bolts. Most people have 4. Mike May runs these little tiny 3 things. I don't think he ever has any trouble.
So if you're machining your own back out of stainless, why not run an O-ring groove around the base of the thing? That way your gasket.
I don't know if it takes the temperature. It takes 600 degrees.
Well, you can get by time.
Yeah, by the time will be 600.
Not that early. What are
That'd be
they,
nice.
what's the,
I mean, I've wanted to put an O-ring groove around the cylinder heads on the engines. I can't find anything that'll stand up.
what's the
And
gasket
the
in
silicone, huh?
what's the gasket in the bedside indicator now made out of?
Some kind of asbestos substitute, I think. I don't know. I don't know. They make what they call a Graflex one that seems to be layers of stuff with graphite, and that extrudes like crazy. I don't like that. It's too slippery. When you squish it down, the stuff wants to go out. This kind of grayish composition gasket seems to work better. The ideal thing would be no gasket, lots of bolts.
Well, if there are no more questions from the group, why don't we socialize a little bit? We have some refreshments in the next room, and you can talk to Art individually if
You want to look at this stuff that's here? There's some handouts, 25 from each, so there ought to be enough. You can have a catalog.
Thank you very much, Art.
The one you've probably heard, you've heard most of this, but you haven't heard all that. That's, I
That's all it goes till the battery dies. The battery's supposed to die in half an hour, and it's an hour and a half.
I was standing by the back door of my shop, looking at the